All right, this video is on Chapter 7, Sampling. It's on the first half, right up until the time where it says interrogating external validity. So read up to there, and just to recap some important issues about sampling methods. So sampling is, how do you get the people that are going to be in your study? Because we're interested in studying people, but we're not going to study everybody. We're not taking data from everybody. We're taking data from some people, maybe 40 people, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, but not the entire population, just a small piece of it, a sample. So the question is, how do we get those people? How do we get that sample? And there are a bunch of different ways to do it. And this has to do, first of all, with external validity, because depending on who I got and how I got them, that will determine, well, can I take what I learned about these 40 people and then apply it to everybody else in the population? Or do I have to be more careful about that? And who do these people represent anyway? So we'll start off with sampling methods that are considered random. Now, first of all, let me also mention that besides external validity, internal validity is also an issue, because if you have some really wacky, biased sample, you may be drawing conclusions that are just crud. So you have to be careful about how you got your sample. All right, now let me say something also about populations. Populations can be very specific groups. It's not just everybody in the world or all Americans. I mean, if I'm in marketing, I might be interested in doing some research or gathering data about the behavior of your typical online consumer. You know, people that buy products online, what are they like? What do they do? How can I, best interface with them on my website? I might have some really big questions. Now, if I'm a marketer with a firm in Knoxville and my client is a gourmet pizza restaurant, I may not be interested in the typical online consumer, but I'm interested in people who go online to order pizza for delivery or pickup in Knoxville, and that's my population, and that's who I'm interested in gathering data about. If I'm interested in college students, well, I might be interested in your typical sort of American college student, or I may be an administrator at University of Tennessee, and the questions I need to answer really only have to do with University of Tennessee students, and so they are my population, not all college students. Maybe I'm interested in African American teenage males. Okay, that's a pretty big population. Maybe I'm interested in women who go back to complete a college degree after they're 40. Okay, that's another big yet specific population. So the researcher may have any number of populations they're interested in. They can be very specific and detailed, criteria for who I'm interested. Now, out of all those people, again, I'm not going to go find every single one. I'm going to grab a sample, collect my data, and then depending on how I did that and how well my study is designed, I can take what I found out about those few people and use it to make inferences about everybody else in the population that they represent. All right, so we'll start with the random procedures, which are actually not what gets used a lot in a lot of psychology research, but random sampling, first of all, is very different, completely unconnected to random assignment. Random assignment comes later, and only if you're doing an experiment. Random sampling is a type of, how do I grab people to be in my sample thing? That's random sampling, and there's a few kinds. Once I have all my people, if I happen to be doing an experiment, well, then I'm going to take those, again, maybe 40 people, and randomly assign them to different groups of my independent variable. That's all totally different, a later step in the process. Very easy. Students get these confused all the time. So just, random sampling, how do you get your people? Random assignment, how do you put them in groups for an experiment? Totally different. All right, so let's do the random sampling. This is also called probability sampling, representative samples. And the reason is because once you have your population identified, if you're doing random sampling, what that means is every single person in the population has an equal and independent chance of being selected for the study. Now, think about this right here. If I have a population of people, and every one of them has the possibility of me picking them out and inviting them, say, hey, come do my study. I would have to know who all those people are and have a way to get in touch with them. So you can only do random sampling procedures if you actually have a list of every person in your population and a way to get in touch with them. So phone number, an address, something like that. Now, if I'm an administrator at UT and I want to collect some data, I can get that list. I can go to the registrar and say, hey, I need a list of all registered, seniors who are commuters. That's my population. And they can give it to me. So I can actually do random sampling of that population. But if I'm interested in college students, I can't get a list of every single college student. It's impossible. Or even if I wanted to get a list of every registered college student in the fall of 2015, maybe theoretically it's possible, but it would be ridiculous. It would take so much time and effort, like you wouldn't even bother. That's just silly. So that's one reason, probably the biggest reason, that most studies in psychology do not use random sampling, because the list of all the people in the population either doesn't exist or it'd be so ridiculous to even try to put it together. Well, that's it right there. You don't have a list. Okay. So, but sometimes we do. Even if you want to survey, for example, University of Chicago surveys, Americans, United States citizens, their attitudes. Well, where's a list of everybody? Actually, they run this thing called the census every decade, every 10 years. They go around, they try to count everybody in the United States and get all this information, and they actually go out and they try and find the homeless people and get their names down. They do as best as they can. They actually do create a list. So there are research studies that use that as their list and randomly sample people to be in their survey. So it's possible, but very rare and expensive. All right, so let's say we do have a list, because hey, we have all these, the list of the students at UT, and we're running some kind of research. That's our population. Well, the first thing would be simple random sampling, and that means basically you have one group. So I've got my UT students. Even if I say I want all commuters who are registered, commuter students at UT, that's my list. And I randomly pick people out of that. And I can do this by assigning everybody a number and then using a random number generator. I can say, all right, let's say there's, I don't know how many commuters, let's say there's 15,000 people on this list. And I have little pieces of paper with the numbers 1 through 15,000 in a bowl, and I pick them out. I probably wouldn't do that, but I could. I would just go Google random number generator and have it spit out. I go, I need to invite 60 people to take a survey. Give me 60 random numbers between the number 1 and 15,000. And 592 came up, so I'll call that guy and really try and get him to be in my study. I could do that. You can roll dice. There are any number of ways to make it random. The lottery where they have the ping pong balls go, and they pulled up their, well, if they had 15,000 ping pong balls, I could do it that way. I would use a computer program. But anyway, in simple random, the thing is there's one group. If you go to stratified random, what you do is you have subgroups within your population. So let's use UT students again. Let's say I'm interested in UT students, but I want to sample from commuter students and those who live on campus. And so I have 2 subgroups within my sample that I want. Or I want freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior. So I have 4 subgroups. This is when I have stratification. Now within each of those subgroups, I will be randomly recruiting people, randomly sampling people and inviting them to be in my study if I'm doing this kind of random sample. So there's simple, one group. Stratified random has subgroups. And then go ahead and read about cluster sampling. That's basically when you have, groups of people like clusters. They could be floors of a dorm. They could be fast food restaurants in Knoxville. And I randomly sample, some of those restaurants. But once one gets picked, I take data from everybody that works there. Or once out of all the dorm floors, when I randomly pick dorm and floors to sample from, but once I pick one, I take all the students that live on that floor. That would be a cluster sample. So there's a random component, but I do take everybody in the cluster. Read about oversampling, read about systematic sampling. Let's move on though to the non-random. So this is when everyone in my population does not have an equal and independent chance of being selected. The most common is convenience sampling. Now, this is by far the most common sampling method in psychology. This is like when in IntroPsych it said, oh, sign up to be a research participant, and if you don't want to do that, you have to write a paper. That where people are selecting themselves for your study. Now, you can have criteria. You can say, I want people between the ages of 18 and 25 who can eat ice cream and it won't make you sick. That's who I'm recruiting. And it's still a convenience sample. Now, if you have a very special thing that you want people to have, a special quality, your book is calling that purposive sampling. And that's like, okay, I don't just need a certain age, or I don't need like just women of a certain age. I actually need someone with a particular characteristic. Your book talks about, like, I'm interested in smokers. I need to recruit smokers. Or I need to recruit people who are hoarders or are really horrible spellers. Anything where there's a very specific thing I'm looking for, that we would call purposive sampling. But it's still going out and finding people to volunteer. So it's a kind of convenience sample, non-random sampling or non-probability sampling. Snowball sampling is just when, you know, people are hard to find because of my criteria. So when I find one, I'm like, oh, you're a really horrible speller. Do you know anybody else that's a horrible speller? That's a kind of silly example, but oh, you're a hoarder. Have you ever met anyone else who maybe you think is a hoarder? Can you put me in touch with them? Or your child has autism. What other parents do you know who have kids on the spectrum? I'm recruiting, I need, you know, kids for a research project, and that's how I recruit, from one person to the next, and your sample kind of snowballs. Oh, nice name. Okay, quota. I like to think of a quota sampling like stratified convenience sampling. Remember, stratified random sampling was just random sampling but with subgroups. Well, quota sampling is a convenience sample. You know, I'm going out and recruiting and trying to advertise and find people. But so they self-select because they go, yes, I volunteer, but I also have subgroups that I'm looking for. So it's quota sampling. And typically my subgroups, I'm going to try and match some kind of demographic that I know about. So let's say at UT, I'm not sure if this is true, but let's say 65% of UT students are women. So I'm going to go get a convenience sample. I have some survey I want to do, and I'm going to stand outside the library or the cafeteria or something. As people walk by, I'm going to say, hey, would you take a minute to fill out my survey? But I'm going to make sure I get 65% women in my survey, 35% men, because I'm trying to match the demographic breakdown of men and women at UT. But it's still a convenience sample, so it's called quota. All right, that covers sort of the basic sampling techniques that I want you to know about, and then so we'll do a part 2 video for interrogating sampling techniques. And so go ahead, do more reading, and then go to part 2.